going to open this podcast with a quote. The question isn't who is going to let me, it's who is going to stop me. Ayn Rand. For those of you not familiar with Ayn Rand, she was a Russian-born writer and philosopher who is credited with creating and popularizing the philosophy of objectivism, a philosophy most prevalent in her two most well-known novels, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. Now, we're not here to debate the demerits of objectivism. No, I use the quote not because it popped up first on the Google search, it does, but because I feel that the ideal reflected in that quote led to the development of the Bioshock series. The director and writer of Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite, Ken Levine, cut his teeth as a writer on Thief: The Dark Project and System Shock 2, the latter of which many declare Bioshock to be a spiritual successor to. His experience with both these games led him to write and direct Bioshock, but the development of Bioshock wasn't without its distractors. Despite the resistance, Levine and his team persevered to deliver the game he envisioned. Things were not much different with Bioshock Infinite. What? Bioshock 2? Oh, well, that's because Levine had nothing to do with it, but don't worry, we'll get to it. So ultimately, the only one who could stop Ken Levine was Ken Levine himself, and that's very fortunate. The Bioshock series may be a first-person shooter, but what separates it from other games of its type is its world building. Despite the fact that Rapture and Columbia are fictional locations, they feel believable because their design was based on very human ideals. Maybe flawed human ideals, but human ideals regardless. These places were built with the best of intentions, but when we join them, they are reflections of the darkest parts of extremism, of blind faith. And realistically, your role is not to be the savior of the world, but to survive it. So now it's time to hear the voices of those who survived. Now we can speak of the Bioshock series. See you at the end of the show.
We swim in different oceans but land on the same shore. It always starts with a lighthouse.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another podcast. What we got here going on tonight is our podcast on Bioshock. Now, some of you out there may be wondering why we're covering Bioshock, and god damn it, James wanted to do it, so we're doing it, right, James?
Yay.
Wait, hey, you're the one who brought it up. Why are you not more enthusiastic about this?
All right, yay.
All right, and then today we also have Frank and Mike B joining us. These are all returning co-hosts. They have been here before several times. If you remember Mike, he discussed his love, his unrequited love of Sonic, and you can see it behind him along with his cap. Then we got Frank, who's probably going to be fighting with his kitty all night long, so don't be surprised if he has to step out every now and again.
Yeah, he's being uncooperative.
So the reason Bioshock came up is James brought up to me that he's been playing through the what version is it, James?
So yeah, this is the HD collection that they re-released on. I think it's on most of the current gen systems.
No.
Yeah, it's on what's it called? The PS4. I don't know if it's on PC though. I think there's just like the remastered versions that they had on Steam, but those are old versions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they're all separate. They don't have like a collection bundle or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think.
Yeah, this is the actual collection. It's remastered in HD.
And so the reason we want to talk about is all of us have played this, though not all of us are of the same positive opinion of the game series, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But what we wanted to start off with today is talking about a little bit of the history of Bioshock. This actually goes back to the early 90s, and I'm going to start us off with just explaining a little bit about the backstory, where the company that we're going to be talking about is, oh crap, I forgot their name. Was it Lighthouse Technologies? No, it wasn't Lighthouse. Anyone remember what they were called?
Wait, are you talking about the developers of System Shock?
Yes.
It was Looking Glass Studio.
Looking Glass. That's right.
Yeah, so they went through a couple different name changes, but when they were Looking Glass Technologies, they were working on Ultima Underworld and then Ultima Underworld 2. Both of those games were headed by Warren Spector of Deus Ex fame, which came later. And what they wanted to do, it was take the concept of Ultima Underworld, which is a dungeon crawler, and basically do it in space. And that's how the concept of System Shock came about. But it was also really important that the gameplay that was developed was not immersive. There is a word for it, but basically where the player can control, or I guess the player would experience
insert themselves into the role.
Yeah, but there's a word for emergent. It was emergent gameplay where, you know, you go through the game and certain things would happen based on players' interactions with the game. So the experience wasn't always the same, and it wasn't always the way the developer intended. It was kind of that concept where, you know, and the Mike brought up earlier before we started the podcast, Elder Scrolls. And if you remember, Elder Scrolls 2 had those dungeons that were constantly changing. If you left the dungeon and went back, it would be a completely different dungeon. It would not have the same layout. So you'd only get that one experience through it. And though System Shock wasn't like that, the concept was to make it so that as you went through the game, you never felt like you were playing the same game twice. And with System Shock 2, that changed a little bit when they brought in a different group of people to work on it, because Warren Spector is busy working on Deus Ex.
It's just dialogue that changes then?
Well, and if you remember, well, the thing is, none of us in this group have played System Shock, right?
I haven't played the first one.
Okay, so
No, I haven't.
There is no like dialogue trees in System Shock. One of the big things that they made a deal of is that they felt that in Ultima Underworld 2, the dialogue trees actually slowed the game down. So what they did is they have no living people in System Shock. All the story is told through records in the game. So you find an item of someone left behind, like a recording. That's the story. And as you read those recordings, you get more of the backstory of the game. Not dissimilar from Bioshock 1, right? Where you find a lot of those recordings from people that were left behind.
Most of the Bioshocks are like that, yeah.
Right, exactly. And there's a lot of games that have been influenced where you find those recordings. I mean, there's going to be tons of games that we talk about that have been influenced by System Shock aside from Bioshock. And but that's one of the things that System Shock did. They removed the concepts of dialogue trees because they felt it slowed the game down based on the way dialogue trees were designed back in the day. Of course, that's changed a lot since then. But with System Shock 2, that's where Ken Levine comes into play. Now, I don't know if you guys know what Ken Levine was doing before working on System Shock 2. He was responsible for being the creative director, the writer for Thief. If you guys remember the original Thief game that came out back in the day, which is an excellent game, by the way. But he was responsible for the writing. Yeah, very good stuff. And so they brought him on board to continue doing the writing for System Shock 2. And it was a completely different director and producer. Warren Spector was busy working on Deus Ex, so he wasn't working on System Shock 2. So the gameplay changed a lot. It was less standard, or I guess it was more standard RPG elements than the original one, because the original one does have RPG elements, but they're more under the hood, or they don't use them in the same traditional way as other RPGs did. But in the second one, they're a little bit more traditional, where you collect experience points and you can level up your character or level up your weapons and things like that. And but of course, what was a big draw for that one was, of course, the storytelling and the tenseness of the game because of its horror-like elements that we've become accustomed to, you know, like in games like Dead Space, and so that's what made System Shock 2 very popular, and that's why a lot of games that are made today in that kind of ilk are use System Shock 1 and 2 as references for making design decisions on those games. So it's a really fascinating history because, you know, System Shock didn't sell very well, either one. As a matter of fact, after System Shock 2, Lighthouse. What was the name of the group again? Looking Glass. Looking Glass Technologies went kaput. The last game they released was Thief 2, and then that was it. Then they closed their studio. There was another game that was in development, but it got finished up by another studio. I can't remember what kind of game. It was like some flight sim or something. And then that's it. They left that legacy. And then Ken Levine was working with Irrational Games. And of course, they started working on Bioshock, and then they sold themselves to 2K Games, or Take-Two Interactive, which became 2K Games. And then they published Bioshock in 2007, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's where we come. That's where we get to Bioshock now. And so I don't know. I don't know how much you guys knew about all this stuff, but I was just reading through it the last couple of days, and it's just a really fascinating history where, the reason Bioshock exists wasn't because some guy, came into the door and said, I have this great idea. It was a long thing in development. And usually I think when people see Ken Levine in Bioshock, they think he was the director of Bioshock, but really he was the creative director behind the game. So he was responsible for the story elements. I mean, I'm sure he had something to say about gameplay elements. He had experience with that, but obviously he kept himself within his expertise, which was the story. And I think,
and
go ahead, James.
You can see that in System Shock 2, where you could tell he wanted to do more in that game, and of course the limitations of the technology, and then of course he brought that over into Bioshock. So there's a lot of influences in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And there is I know there are some other issues where System Shock 2 was originally not designed to be a sequel. It was supposed to be its own standalone game. And then there is some pressure from the company in order to make it a sequel to the game, I guess, in order to continue building off of the world and the popularity of the original game. And of course, we see that all the time in businesses, where, I mean, we're going to talk about it, I'm sure, with Bioshock, especially when we get to Bioshock 2, because Ken Levine did not work on Bioshock 2. That was a different production company.
Oh, and you can tell.
Right. So that's what I have for the history. I got nothing else to add. There's Mike giving the thumbs up to Bioshock 2. We're going to get to that. And you guys ready to move on to these questions then?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So, James, since you are the instigator of this podcast, my first question to you is, how is Bioshock different from other first-person shooters?
It kind of brought in a lot of that horror element, into the gameplay, which you don't really have a whole lot of first-person shooters that, in the same genre, the horror genre. So, to me that's a big draw to the game. Having to experience the horror through like a first-person type game.
And how about you, Frank?
For me, I think a lot of it was the art direction, because you could see some of the steampunk influence in it. The retrofuturism. I really love the creative design of Rapture and, to a lesser extent, Columbia. But the very first Bioshock, I mean, I remember just the spectacle of it all. Starting even from the very first scene when you're stuck in the middle of the ocean, and it's just this gorgeous scenery, this flaming wreckage around you that you have to wade past. And I think from right then, to me, it was like, wow, this is going to be more, immersive as an experience while playing, as opposed to just run around, shoot bad guys, And then also the story itself and the unexpected storytelling at times. So for me, it was way more immersive than most other shooters I had played up to that point. Because up to that point, what I had really played were a lot of 90s shooters, like Doom, Wolfenstein, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, a lot of the real popular stuff that there is storytelling, but it was not as immersive as Bioshock had been up to that point. So for me, I'd say that just it's a very deep experience as an FPS.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I just want to say for sure, I do like the series. I think they're great games. I'm not saying they're bad games or terrible games. I understand what they are, and I know they have their mark in gaming history. It's just, personally, myself, I don't really enjoy playing them. I don't know why. But I am impressed by what they've done and how it looks, because just like Frank, when I remember playing the demo on a Xbox 360, and it was that plane crash thing, and that was just visually for that time, that was just amazing with the fire reflecting off the water and everything like that. It just looked really great, and that what made you want to keep going. Like it's like that demo was going to make sure I'm going to play this game for sure. One of the things I think that's it really brought to first-person shooters though was what's the thing called again, where they take the drinks and then they get the abilities?
The plasmids.
Yes, I thought that was a pretty cool, unique thing they did for the FPS part of it, and how it was unique on certain characters or progress on really hard parts. You could like use the electricity on water, and it conducts it, and kind of gets the whole area. So like just a new mechanic to kind of work your way through the game, which is really cool. That's what I thought.
It's interesting that you guys all talk about those things. Like James brought up the horror elements in the game, Frank the way the world looks, and then Mike the game mechanics, because I think, and this goes back to what we talked about the introduction, that this game so much didn't introduce new concepts as it did, is it took these concepts that were usually done in separate games and then combined them into one game that used them all, and it did it very well. I mean, you look at obviously the System Shock influence with the horror elements, and then also the storytelling, but then there are games like Deus Ex, which were first person design, though they weren't exactly first person shooters, that do a lot of those elements in regards to having different abilities. Now Bioshock does it in a more minimalist style, where you have the plasmids as opposed to having a smorgasbord of weapons and other devices that you can use in Deus Ex. But you can see, looking at Bioshock, that game's influenced by that, and it definitely took all those elements, the creative design, the horror elements of dealing with the what do you call the enemies in the game?
Splicers in the first one.
The splicers in the first one, like dealing with those splicers is intense, especially early on, and then you run into the big daddies, and of course those fights can be very intense, but they're also very cinematic, and they grab you and they keep you going through. So yeah, definitely different for the time. It kind of came in at the time of video games where that stuff was really starting to happen. I mean, you have a game, we don't usually talk about it a lot, but like the first Fear game. That was a strict horror first-person shooter, and though to me it isn't as good as Bioshock, it definitely has a lot of those elements that work for it, particularly that first Fear game. And then of course games like that led to things like Dead Space, where Dead Space has an incredible story, and it's definitely an amazing horror game, and you can see all those elements in that game. But it kind of came at that time where we weren't seeing that kind of stuff before. It was new to us, and it took all those concepts from those original games in the past.
That's because like Fear was like, it had horror, just like elements of a look sort of every now and then, but Bioshock, it has the whole theme is based around like a horror environment. Mm-hmm. That because Fear just had like, you're going through an office building and you're having shootouts with people, and then there'd be like a scary creepy girl every so often, But Bioshock kind of put it where the background, the scenery, the lighting, everything was just based to be like a horror style. Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying it's scary. Like, I didn't think Bioshock was very creepy or scary, but it had that theme.
I think this is where Frank's going to jump in and tell us why it's not horror, and I think he does. I think he is right. So go ahead, Frank.
Okay, so the reason I think it's not really horror is because it's too sci-fi to be horror. I think, well, Bobby and I have had this conversation before, but just really quickly, is that it's presented more as a mystery as opposed to horror. And yeah, it's creepy, it's got that unsettling atmosphere, but like right away when the mystery, the more you learn about it, it's, I don't know, I don't really consider it horror, but it does have horror elements. Mm-hmm. It's
that's why I said more of a horror element to it.
Yeah,
rather than just saying that it is a horror game. But yeah,
it is normally put on like horror game charts.
Yeah, and you can see why, and there's a lot of ambiance to to the backdrop as well. If you just in idle, you can hear in the background, water dripping in the background. The bulkheads of this underwater city starting to creak and fall apart. Very unsettling sounds of the splicers moving about in the background, and that's just like sitting there at idle. Which has like that element of uncertainty, especially if you're playing this with a really good headset.
Yeah, and I think saying sci-fi is the right way to describe it. am using the word horror as if it's interchangeable, but really a horror game is very different than
Sci-fi horror.
sci-fi games. Well, no, then you have sci-fi horror because you can carry those elements in there, but
Yeah.
it's a
Dead
sci-fi
Space
game
is-
first.
To me, it's like, yes. And because, you know, if you actually, you brought up Dead Space earlier, and if you compare the two, it's both that very like new environment, there's a mystery to solve, but whereas Dead Space definitely goes in the horror direction, you
Mhm.
can clearly see how the sci-fi influence, you know, kind of walks the Bioshock story along.
Right.
Yeah.
Among other things, because that game, the story-wise, has so many elements going for it that are not just sci-fi. I mean, you have the whole Ayn Rand objectivism thing, which goes throughout the entire game, and then the element of I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and that's just the first one, because
Right.
I think the second one has a little bit more to do with existentialism, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the third one more about like anywhere from racial politics to what's the word I'm looking for? Classism. I mean, there's well, we can get to that, but yeah, there are so many, you know, underlying
Divinity.
themes for all three games.
Yeah. And a lot of those, you know, Ken Levine, obviously, you know, you could tell he's a reader of these works. And he puts a lot of that influence into it, social, political
Commentary.
behind it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was just remembering something about Ken Levine because the other thing that he wanted to do when he originally graduated from college, apparently he wanted to be a screenwriter, and he moved out to LA to write scripts for movies and things like that. And obviously it didn't pan out, which is why he started working for why do I keep forgetting the name of this company? Looking Glass Studios.
Looking Glass.
And I got to look it up because I don't remember, but apparently like in like the early 2010s, he wrote a script for I guess they're trying to reboot Twilight Zone in the early 2010s, separate from the one that was more recently done by what's the comedian's name?
Jordan Peele?
Yeah, by Jordan Peele. And he wrote the pilot for it, and of course it didn't get picked up. But you know, obviously the guy likes to cut his teeth on this type of stuff if he's trying to write something like for Twilight Zone, and so it's not surprising that he does a lot of these themes. But again, we got to remember that Bioshock 2 was not his story; that was someone else, and it's Bioshock and Bioshock Infinite that are his. But in general, the company that developed Bioshock 2 tried to, you know, create their own theme of existentialism. And run with it. And I don't know, I have not personally played Bioshock 2. I think you said, Frank, you haven't played it either. But
I played, like the first, I don't know,
I've played
20
it.
minutes, 30 minutes, like, and it just didn't really hook me.
But Mike B, you've played it as well, with like James has, right?
Mm-hmm. So I played that's personally my favorite one. That's the one I do enjoy, sort of.
Yeah, and it has its elements to it. There's things that they improved on it. Most of it in gameplay. I feel like the story is a little more weaker. Obviously, because you know the guy who's usually spearheading this wasn't involved in it. So I can see why people do like it. It improved on the gameplay quite a bit.
It really did.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I do enjoy about it. The gameplay on it has been improved greatly. The Bioshock 1, the switching between weapon and plasmids, which they encouraged you to do, was very jank, a little clunky, hard to wield, and they improved that quite a bit in Bioshock 2. As far as ease of play, it's better in 2, but weaker in story.
Yeah, I just remember it was cool that you could use electricity in the first one to and then you shoot him, and it's a fast way to kill him. But it was also a pain to switch to that and switch back. I thought
it was. It was a little jank.
I think the intent was to make it more strategic.
And it was using the elements, given the situation that you're currently in, using stuff like is the splicer in water. You can use electricity. Yeah. Is the splicer running across an oil slick? You can use fire. There's just different ways to tackle each individual fight. using the weapons. And of course, each weapon also had different ammo types that you can switch in between. So one ammo type is more effective against one enemy than the other.
Which I thought was cool. It was just weird in the first one. That's all.
So, obviously, you guys still feel that Bioshock 2 is a good game. I know a lot of times when you look up stuff on the internet, a lot of people say, well, don't bother playing Bioshock 2 as if it's a horrible game. And, from the way you guys talk about it, sounds like even though it may be weaker story-wise compared to 1, mechanically it's an improvement over 1, and therefore it's still worth playing through.
Yes, and it is. If you just want to play Bioshock 1, you get all of the story, everything associated with it. You really don't need to go into Bioshock 2 for the story. You can end it right there at Bioshock 1 and be fulfilled in the story. Bioshock 2 just kind of adds to the story a little bit, adds to some of the characters that are in there, expands the characters a little bit more. And these are like NPCs that you run into in Bioshock 1. So not really necessary as far as story-wise to play, but I do suggest people play it. Just if they enjoyed Bioshock 1 and its gameplay is improved quite a bit in the second one.
That's good to know, because I haven't played Bioshock 2, not because I've been purposely avoiding it, but just because, I heard it wasn't as good, and it's just like, well, it was never really on my list of things to do. But hearing you guys talk about it, maybe I should go back and try it.
I did enjoy the different perspective, though. This perspective was cool because you play as a big daddy in that one, and then you have your own, what is it, little sister? What are they called again?
Yeah, little sisters.
Yeah,
little sisters.
You have your own little sister that he's, it's very simple, but that's true. That's probably why people, story-wise, it's very simplistic on its storyline, because you're just some big monster protecting a little girl that, So, but I thought it was pretty cool to see it from that side of the view of like the storyline or the Bioshock world.
You're playing as like the first Big Daddy, the first I don't want to say like being that they helped create to do this. So you're a little more sentient than the other ones. So again, it adds more to the story of what these things are, who they are, and who are the characters that are in this world. What are their motivations? And that it tells the story through that perspective.
Okay, so then let me ask you guys this: have the first Bioshock game that you played, was it the original Bioshock?
Yes, the first one.
Frank, you too?
What was that question? One more time.
The first Bioshock game that you played was the original?
Yeah, that was the first one I
Okay,
played.
so all of us have experienced Bioshock from the very first game. Okay,
Yes.
So this leads into our next question then, which is, what was the defining moment for you in Bioshock? And I'm thinking, since we all started with that first Bioshock, there's something that happened in that original Bioshock game that caused us to want to continue playing it and also continue the rest of the games in the series. So Mike, starting with you, what was that defining moment?
It would be the exact moment Frank said earlier. That plane crash it was just one of those things that draws you in. You didn't really have much of gameplay, but just from the scenery and of the plane crash and how it looked, it was you had to go on to this adventure and be like, where is this going to go now? And just that whole opening scene was really well done. Just once you get to the tower, the lighthouse tower, the ocean, the elevator, like just how the intro is to that very first game is a drawing point. And then it just keeps adding more and more, because then you meet a Big Daddy, you meet all these like characters that they're all really awesome, So it just draws you in. But yeah, that's mainly it. Just the opening scenes, so like probably the first 30 minutes of the game.
How about you, James?
You know what? I have to agree that beginning is what draws you in the most. There's a mystery behind it. There's something that you want to solve. What is this place? How did it get this way? And you kind of feel like you're the hero because this guy is asking you for help save my family. And he's asking you for help because you're not affected by a lot of what's going on here. So you have more of an avenue to discover what's going on, and kind of peel back the layers of of the story and this mystery of what happened to this utopia, and that just kind of draws you in.
I think we're far enough along where we don't have to worry about hiding spoilers. So,
I mean,
yeah.
it is what over a 10-year-old game now, but you come to find out that the person who's asking for help doesn't have the best intentions for you, right?
What is
So now,
Saw that coming a mile away though.
what is
That's
the
what was
pseudonym that he
disappointing.
uses?
Atlas.
Atlas.
Thank you.
Atlas, which comes from
Atlas
the
Shrugged.
influence Atlas Shrugged, Ayn
Right.
Rand references there. Yeah,
The selfish garbage novel that is Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get to the philosophy in a little bit.
Yeah.
but yeah, that kind of stuff kind of pulls you in, wanting to solve this mystery of what's going on here. And it part of it too is also the atmosphere that they that they build, the world building around it too, is very it kind of pulls you in.
Well, it was unique too because it also had what they're called again, splicers.
Splicers, yeah.
The splicers.
Yeah. So when you start getting further into the game, and we're cool about talking about spoilers since the game's so old, right?
Yeah, like I said.
Oh yeah, we're good.
Go
So
for it, man.
when you start figuring out it's everyone going crazy over using that stuff, it gets to the point where you're trying to, I guess, fix what's going on in the world, or mainly, I guess, you're trying to escape somehow. But you have to resolve problems that are there with them, and it's also weird because a lot of them are going crazy and stuff like that. So it makes it feel like okay, they're just crazy. They're kind of victims in a way, sort of, even though they're attacking you and they're the bad guys that you got to destroy or kill. But
I mean, they're victims of the overall philosophy that
Yeah.
the world has built and
yeah,
around
I
them.
didn't-
You know what I mean?
but that they were exposed to all of that stuff, and that also like made them go insane too. You know.
Oh, yeah,
I
that's all-
disagree,
that's
but
all.
we can talk about that during the
Yeah,
philosophy.
I think when we get to
Yeah.
philosophy, because I have some
Okay.
things to say about that too. But
Yeah,
I'd like,
because you're digging more into the philosophy behind the story.
all right, Frank, what was your defining moment?
So funnily enough, the first game was kind of ruined for me by James, which is not entirely his fault. But we were talking about it because I had started playing it, and then he brought up the plot twist, the spoiler, and I was like, oh. And I don't know if you remember James, but I was like, it's not a big deal. Like I didn't really care about spoilers. But so the first game kind of lost a lot of its mystery to me, but it was still a great experience. So for me, I'd say the defining moment is actually in the DLC for Infinite, where you play as Elizabeth and it connects back to the first game.
Yeah, what
And
was
to
it?
me, I was like, did you ever play it?
Yeah,
You never did,
but
right?
It was Lost at Sea, right?
Is that the one where everything's
Burial
black
at
and
Sea.
white?
Buried at Sea.
It wasn't black and white. It was still in color. I think like parts were, but
Okay.
Well, I think when it started out, it was in black and white, and then it went into the color mode.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
So-
I never heard that.
For
Started
me,
out
it
as
was
kind of like a noir type.
Right.
Yes.
yes. So I'd say for me, it was just the full circle telling of the story. That was more the defining moment because, with the first one and third one being headed by, Ken Levine, and there was obviously like a vision that he had, just the way that it was connected, I really, really like there's a lot of opinions about how it's overrated. It's, a lot of people have issues with it, but for me, I really enjoyed that experience. I really enjoyed what was told for the story. So just the revelation that, you see the future in the past. And I thought that was really cool.
All right, so to elaborate, first of all, what is it that people are saying is overrated? The DLC or the Bioshock Infinite itself?
I think, well, both Infinite and even the DLC, like the story itself. I mean, it seemed like to have gotten a mixed review, and I think also because they were originally planning on releasing a third chapter for Burial at Sea, but they ended up scrapping it because right after that came out, I think the studio closed. If I'm not Irrational Games closed, I think shortly after the deal.
Because Ken Levine left the studio. He was closing it out. Like technically, it's not closed. It was he left the studio, and then there are some people remaining. And then a few years ago, they they renamed the studio. I can't remember what they renamed it to, but now they're working on more like novelized games, or I can't remember the term that they used. But anyway, so yeah, that last part never got released, so we probably won't see the final vision that he had for the overall story.
Yeah, but I really liked Infinite, despite its flaws. So it was, yeah, like the tail end of the series was the defining moment for me.
Okay, so it wasn't so much the original Bioshock that sold you, it was really the way they closed out with Infinite that sold you.
I'd say, well, just for me to appreciate it, because I mean, well, we can get to favorite game in a little bit, but yeah, I just that full circle storytelling. That's what made the defining moment for me for the series.
Okay. I know for me, with the original Bioshock, the moment that sold me was, I'm with you guys on the intro, but it wasn't the waking up in the ocean with fire around me. It was the bathysphere opening up to Rapture, because when you get into the bathysphere, you're just going down this tube, and then all of a sudden you see Rapture. You see cities you see skyscrapers underwater, but then the ocean, like they made an excellent job in the cinematography of making sure that you could see that it was a living, breathing world, where you would see sea life. A whale swam by the bathysphere at one point. At another point, you see a Big Daddy walking around outside doing some repairs. In some cases, as you get closer to your entrance, you can see some of the damage that's been done in the last few weeks in Rapture. And it's like, at first, it introduces you to this world that's beautiful and amazing, but you can see the garbage underneath that's seeping through, that's causing that's going to lead to the chaos that you're going to experience. So it's kind of like it kind of lulls you into a sense of calm before thrusting you into this this torrid, damaged world. And so that's pretty much what sold me. When I got through that, I played through Bioshock in a couple days, just because I was so sold on it from the very beginning. And that's why I'm with Frank on the DLC, the Buried at Sea, because when it revisits that world, as much as I like Bioshock Infinite, I do feel that Rapture is the more defined of those worlds. And seeing them combine the concepts that they came up with Infinite, and then bringing it back to Rapture to bring it full circle was definitely fascinating as well. But that's what sold me on that one.
Yeah, it looked really cool, because it's like it looked really beautiful, but when you're looking at all the fine details, like you were saying, like the rust or barnacles all over the place, and there's like, this place is really fucked up. Like, it looks pretty visually, it looks beautiful, but you're like, oh yeah, you're gonna go into a shitstorm, right?
Well, it's more because of the damage and everything like that. I mean, that's I think more to just show all the setup.
Yeah,
what to expect when you get there.
Yeah, and that'd be another drawing point. Yeah, so that's pretty good.
And those water effects for the time were amazing too. They still kind of hold up.
Well, and I think that goes back to what Frank said earlier about the art style. That going with that, I don't even know what you would call that art style, but the designs of the characters, it stands up. Graphically, it may not be the most impressive game that we've seen, but artistically, it still holds up very well. It's a very well designed, well thought out world as far as a creative design.
It's like a noir. It's like a mix between like steampunk, noir. What is it, like 20s era?
Well, yeah, it's.
I don't know how to even describe it. It's
Roaring 20s.
Roaring 20s, noir, steampunk.
Retrofuturism.
Retrofuturism.
That's one of the reasons I don't enjoy playing that game. I don't like that theme of like 30s, and then there's like a radio playing like old ass fucking music and shit. It's not my thing. It's because I don't like just that thing never draws my attention.
No, and that makes sense. I mean, because there are certain games that are like really well done, but just thematically or visually, they just really turned me off. So I can totally understand why it didn't really appeal to you as much.
And I think, I don't know if Bioshock started that or anything like that, but like Fallout, it's been like a running theme with games that they do a lot of, where it just has that 1930s or 40s music or old-fashioned style, or that's when previously it took place beforehand till the present, and the evolution.
Yeah, Fallout kind of follows that same kind of overall aesthetic.
Retro-futuristic.
Retro-futuristic.
There we go. That's what I was trying to say. So I'm not really into that too much. It really kind of just, I don't enjoy it.
Yeah, well, like Frank said, I mean, I can understand that. So we come to the big questions. This is probably going to be the most controversial question because it'll probably bring up the biggest amount of discussion. But what do you think is the philosophy of Bioshock? And keep in mind that Frank and I have not played Bioshock 2. We only know about it from watching gameplay footage or from discussion of others. So I think James and Mike will be better able to discuss the philosophy of Bioshock 2, but we can definitely speak towards Bioshock 1. And Frank, I'm going to let you lead us off on this one. Philosophy of the Bioshock series.
Well, to me, the first one, you do see a lot of the Ayn Rand influence. Obviously, even anywhere from the names to the principles and the philosophies that Rapture is founded on from Andrew Ryan, and he really does a good job of illustrating how kind of impractical objectivism is, because Andrew Ryan in the world of Bioshock, he created Rapture, which is supposed to be the ultimate utopia and everything like that, and it's in ruins because of everybody's selfishness and greed and lust for power and everything like that, which just it's a testament to why objectivism is not even ideal or practical, but also why it's detrimental to any society. So for me, that I'd say that's the philosophy of the first one, just to, it's a critique, a very harsh critique in a sci-fi setting of objectivism. The second one, I can't really speak much to, with the idea of the Big Daddy and the choices you have to make. I'm not really sure. I haven't experienced that enough. And then with the third one being very politically charged, especially, it's with the post-Civil War integration of societies, North and South and everything like that. And you see it spill over into Columbia and the racism. I don't know. I mean, it's very critical of very self-driven, selfish motivations in society. I think that's kind of like the overlying philosophy for 1 and Infinite, in my opinion.
James, what's your take?
Very similar to what Frank said. It, basically, Bioshock 1 is libertarians under the sea here. The idea, it's that philosophical question: are we equal, or should we be all equal? You have this utopia that believes that everybody will prosper if they just do what they're supposed to do. Unchecked capitalism. Those are the kinds of things that we think of as like a utopia where everybody lives together in harmony, but that's not the case. That never really happens in real life, and this just kind of that social commentary about that. I think is the main theme of the first Bioshock, where you have this society that says that everybody here is on equal plane, but we don't have any checks and balances to stop people from doing experiments on other human beings. Unchecked capitalism.
Really, really quick question though. You're saying that they're talking about people being on equal fields. Andrew Ryan was not about that at all.
Right.
The whole point. Like it was the opposite. He's all like
him
"We're
himself,
better."
yes, because he's the leader of that place, and of course, that's not. The leader's not going to be. He's going to want everybody else to think that way, not not him himself.
But
You know what I
no,
mean?
I mean, well, for their society, he was saying that our society is better than the surface world. So he wasn't really proposing that we were equal or that everybody did their part. It was we get all the benefits and everybody else can stay up there in the surface world and suffer and die and be miserable.
Yeah, man, that's why he pulled away from that. He wanted everybody to have like the utopia where everybody does whatever they're driven for, right?
Oh, you mean,
Um,
that that.
yeah. He wants everybody to strive and have these unchecked, because he believes that if you have too many checks and balances for these kinds of things, it holds a lot of people back, right? And that's why you have the horrible things that they were doing, like human experiments, people making money on the backs of other people, that kind of thing. And so, in the first Bioshock, that's very prevalent in the backstory of how this place. And it just kind of shows that we really can't achieve a true utopia.
Well, not like that.
Not like that. Well, I mean, like I said, it's like that libertarian type philosophy. But the thing is that you can't keep other people from doing bad things because of their own motivations, their own selfish motivations. Sometimes you have to keep things in check, and they kind of failed to do that. And as far as Bioshock Infinite goes, that one, that's again, it starts out as a utopia, right? Where everybody, you have this, beautiful world in the sky, and everybody's, looks like everybody's happy and everybody's getting everything that they need, but there's like this, seedy underground thing happening in the background where people are being exploited. Well, what happens when you exploit people? Well, some people are going to rebel, and you have all these basically white people, rich white people, enjoying the fruits and labors of these minorities that they brought on specifically for doing work. Of course, if you're going to mistreat them, what's going to end up happening? They're going to get together and they're going to fight back. And that's what happens in Bioshock Infinite.
What about Bioshock 2?
For me, that one's harder to pinpoint exactly, only because, like I said, the story isn't written as well. I can see where they're trying to get like this kind of like this nihilist type philosophy going on, but it doesn't do it well enough for me to really pinpoint exactly what's going on. If anybody can jump in on that one a little bit more, but because the storytelling isn't as good, it's harder for me to pinpoint what exactly the philosophy is on that one.
It probably really isn't. It was more just like an expansion, sort of in a way, of like just the story of like the Big Daddy thing part, and that's pretty much it. I didn't think they went too in depth on that.
And of course, it goes into the little sisters and how they're created. Again, it's all about that unchecked, human. You're experimenting on human beings, creating these little sisters, creating these big daddies, and for what? They're basically slaves to, to the society, right?
Well,
and
let's elaborate a little bit here, just so there's clarity for anyone who may not remember Bioshock. So, the purpose of the Little Sisters is to generate Adam, right? And
yes.
Adam is the chemical used to create the
plasmids.
The plasmids, right, for the splicers. And then the Big Daddies were created to protect the Little Sisters, right?
Not only that, but they were also created as workers. So they did things like repairs on the outside, because obviously these people, they don't want to have to go out into, the crushing depths of the ocean to go do work. That's not what these people are for, right? So they're going to create somebody or something to do that for them, right? And they're just kind of like a means to an end. They maintain the entire facilities. and so they're basically slaves. They don't. That's the whole purpose of them. And they're genetically altered in some way, and they have no rights. They again,
Basically
these
like
little sisters
robots.
were created. Yeah, basically kind of like robots, sort of. But they're organic beings, and you kind of see that in two, where you're the original Big Daddy, so you're a little more sentient than the most of them, right? And you have a motivation, and so you kind of see that. You have these people. They want to live their lives, but they don't want to do all the hard work. They just want to reap all the benefits. So they do human experiments, genetically altering people, and creating these kind of like slaves.
Yeah, like you said with their slaves, the Big Daddies were protecting the little sisters, and that's what they do. So with him saying it's the one that's more sentient in part 2, there's more, instead of just I have to protect her because that's just what I'm programmed to do, or that's just how I am. There's actually more of an actual attachment that he has to his little sister,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of shows that.
And it's more, they specifically designed them that way to have attachments to the little sisters.
Okay. And Mike, what about you?
Or what was the question again?
Just the philosophy of Bioshock.
I can't do for each game. I'm just thinking overall, just what I've taken from all 3 games is, if as a nation, if you can't seclude yourself from the rest of the world, and it's just not going to work out well. I mean, that's just what I took from it. Is just every situation, or what's the infinite in the sky, or a rapture in the ocean. Just secluding themselves from the rest of the world is probably not really a good idea, and it didn't work out well for them.
Well, and the only reason, because when you get to Columbia and Infinite, the society from, appearances, like James was saying, it looks like a perfect society. Everybody's happy. But the issue is that the only reason that it appears that everybody's happy is because the people who are out enjoying life are, well, they're all white people. You know what I mean? And you do really quickly, you go further on to see that there are the exploited, minorities, and with the rebellion and everything like that.
And see, I'm sorry. And they brought the minorities there with them to do the hard work that they didn't want to do.
Yeah.
Going back to that whole slavery thing, what's the reason why we had slavery? Well, just, they having somebody you feel is less than you to do the hard work that you don't want to do.
So I'm thinking, again, not having played Bioshock 2, so there's an overall theme with these games. So if you look at them, okay, the original Bioshock takes place in the 60s, but they're living life in the roaring 20s.
50s.
No, it takes place in 1960.
It takes place in 1960 something.
I thought it was
1960.
Is it 1960 exactly?
No, the fall of Rapture happened New Year's 1959.
Okay.
So 1960, and but the way they live life is through the Roaring 20s, right?
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a lifestyle from about 40 years ago. Then you look
with
at
shit music playing on the radio.
and then you look at Bioshock Infinite, and it takes place in the 1910s, I think, like 1913 or something like that. And but they're living a lifestyle that's really pre-Civil War. Yeah. And so we're talking about two societies in which they're trying to recapture what they felt was the ideal lifestyle. That very much
the antebellum South.
Right. Both of those themes run very much concurrent with the theme we see today in our country. For those of you who don't know where we're at, we live in the United States of America, and I know all of us in here in this chat can very comfortably say that we are not in support of the people who are currently in charge of our government, And some of the big influences is, Donald Trump's running theme when he ran for president was "Make America Great Again," referring to a time in America that was supposedly perfect. Oftentimes, people think of the 1950s as that because people have created several types of propaganda showing, let's go back to a more simple time. When in reality, in the 1950s, things were great for a certain group of people in the 1950s, and yes, we'll say white people because that's
Probably
what it
not
was.
good for me.
But they weren't good for people of minority.
Remember Chewbacca again? Oh, I love to remember Chewbacca. Hey, remember when there weren't so many Mexicans? Oh, I remember.
Wait, what?
Yeah, remember when marriage was just between a man and a woman? I remember. Oh, I remember.
Yeah, I remember that. Wait.
Remember feeling safe? Remember no ISIS? Remember Reagan? Oh, I remember. Oh, remember.
What the fuck's going on with these member berries?
And where Bioshock Infinite and the original Bioshock differ is Bioshock Infinite, yes, those people bring up minorities so they can take advantage of those groups, right? They what's the word? They extort those individuals to do the work that they don't want to do. While in Bioshock, because they're objective and they're allowed to run rampant and pretty much do whatever they feel like doing, they create a subgroup of people in order to do the work for them or in order to help them live the life that they want without having to do the heavy lifting in the long run. But the concepts are the same. They want to have someone underneath them to do the hard work because in a real society, you cannot have a group of people where everyone is essentially the same, because not everybody wants to do the same work. There's always going to be somebody who wants more than someone else, and they're going to be willing to step on someone else to do it. I mean, that's what brought down Rapture, right? And the main villain was Frank Fontaine, and he created the Atlas character in order to, well, actually the main story, right? He actually, what was it? He brainwashed your character in order to do the things that you needed to do in the game, right? Is that what it is? And so he's using you. And there's another example of where you have someone taking advantage of their own selfishness in order to use other people to get their dirty work done. And ultimately, I think that's what both these games are saying. Now, in Rapture, the people felt that they were justified to do what they did because they were believed in fulfilling their own self needs and to hell with everyone else. While in Bioshock Infinite, those people used divinity in order to justify their right to be above others. And I think that's where you have the two differing philosophies where the people the reasoning that people use in order to be in charge. But ultimately, you still have the same concept about, well, I want to be the one who's in charge and I can justify it using this methodology. And that's where we run into the similarities between the two games.
Yeah. And kind of to add on to that is, especially with like the splicing and everything like that, I mean, for science fiction, body modifications and everything like that, it's a very common theme. Mm-hmm. But the way it's, regarded in Bioshock is also to show how they're better than everybody else. They're better than humanity because, they're gifted and, they acquire these gifts for their own selfish needs.
They're upgraded.
Yeah, and that's their whole goal using these plasmids is to be stronger and better than most. And they got addicted to it. And obviously it deformed them to the point of becoming almost subhuman now.
Yeah, and this is where we come back to where Mike was talking about, where these splicers were like the victims of the world, but really they were the victims of their own selfishness.
Yes. But I think it's also that promise of whatever was or that the utopia thing was a lie, basically, in a way. Not really a lie, or it just didn't work, sort of, in a way.
Yeah, but I mean, think about it like this.
They are all assholes, probably, too, but yeah, I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, think about it like this, though, Mike, is that, Donald Trump is taking advantage of these people's naivete these days, the same way Andrew Ryan and Comstock, is taking advantage of their own selfishness. The surface dwellers, they're fucked because they're not in Rapture with us who are better than them. We're up here in the clouds in Columbia because we're better than the people down below. And when you have that mentality, you're not a victim. As a matter of fact, you are victimizing others for your own selfish needs. So that's where I disagree that they become victims. It's like they're not victims. They're willing participants in their own,
downfall.
Yes. I'm trying to think of the word.
You reap what you sow.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's I really like that you brought up the social commentary as far as what's going on in society today, because what's going on in society today, it's not new, it's not fresh, it's just a different flavor of the same issues that we've had with this country since it first was formed.
And we're not the only country, because we hear about other countries around the world where you have a dictator who then manipulates the people and puts people in place in order to make the world comfortable for him and his cronies, and to hell with everyone else in society as long as they're comfortable. And that's where you come back to the issue with objectivism. I mean, objectivism would work if everyone did things to benefit themselves without causing harm to others, but most people don't do that.
It's pretty much impossible to do everything for yourself without harming others, because, and this is going to be a little bit of a rant, but us living in the first world, we live very comfortable lives.
Yeah.
I mean, we can play video games. We have access to food, water, electricity, internet. Spending money. Be pretty much enjoying our lives. But we are privileged in the sense that because we have privilege, we are inadvertently exploiting third world countries that we benefit from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can see like some of us are probably wearing clothing or using a device right now that some poor person was making pennies a day trying to put together, and hating their job, but that was the only thing that they had to feed their family. You know what I mean?
Don't you dare insult my Jordans.
And so, we're all sitting in front of devices right now. We probably have them on our heads or talking into them right now, that some, probably poor, probably maybe even a child that put this thing together, and we're kind of enjoying, what we have right now, but it was on the back of somebody else, unfortunately.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Is it even possible to fix that? Is that just how?
And that's the philosophical question of Bioshock. Is it possible to fix that? It looks like not.
Yeah. Well, I think
utopias. People talk about libertarianism or utopias where I'll just let the free market work itself out. Here's the thing: those things need to have checks and balances, because if I can't stop my neighbor's dog from shitting in my yard and him taking responsibility for it, how am I going to stop him from doing other things that harm me in some way? You know what I mean? That's why those laws, those checks, and those balances need to exist.
So
yeah.
To close this out on philosophy, because otherwise we're going to be here all day. I mean, honestly,
we turned into a political rant.
I mean, we really could have just done an entire episode just on the philosophy of Bioshock.
Yeah.
But to close it out, I just think, do I think we could live in a society where everyone could live comfortably and get what they deserve so they don't have to worry about surviving? Yes. But the issue is there's still too many people with power who only want to fulfill their own needs, or really their own wants, and to hell with those below them. And until we can create that type of society. But to be honest, that's the optimism in me. I've always been an optimistic. I do feel that throughout the history of humanity, we have gotten better on getting these people. That's why we have the societies we have today. Because, I mean, if you compare society to what society was like 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, there have been improvements. But whether we'll ever reach that pinnacle is something else entirely. And then we have this thing like this pandemic, which then can set us back steps because it depends on how we respond. So, I mean, part of it has to do with, a lot of people argue, oh, well, you have people who are really intelligent, and really intelligent people are more selfish. And realistically, as humans get more intelligent overall, we actually become less selfish. But
funnily enough, I just wanted to segue really quick. I just watched a video about the problem with Rick and Morty and the way that Dan Harmon frames it, because so there's this guy, he's called Renegade Cut, and he does, analysis of popular culture. And he talks about how the way Dan Harmon presents intelligence is that, if you're cruel, it equates to intelligence because that's the way it's presented for the Rick character. He explains why, being sensitive to others and being emotional is a weakness. And, and like Bobby was saying, is that intelligence does not equate to cruelty. As a matter of fact, it's cruelty is completely a lack of empathy. It's psychopathy. It's more of the way your mind thinks as opposed to how smart you are and what you know.
Yeah, and so I know a lot of people interpret Rick as being that way because of his intelligence. I disagree with that statement, having watched Rick and Morty, where there's more to something that happened to Rick that caused him to be the way he is. It's not because of his intelligence, but part of his intelligence and the way he sees the world is what leads to who he is, and it's not the intelligence itself. But that's way off topic now as far as going on to another thing. But I'm glad you brought that up. I just think it's the way people interpret things, because often, I mean, if you look at movies and TV shows, usually we interpret highly intelligent people as cool. I mean, look at House. House was such a popular show because he's a super intelligent doctor, but he was an asshole. And the
Full House. What?
Full House too. Everyone on Full House was an asshole, but they were all stupid. And he was always portrayed as an asshole, but realistically he wasn't an asshole because he's intelligent. He was an asshole because of the life that he lived and his experiences that made him the person that he is. And that's what leads to people's cruelty. It's their experiences of what they are. And so when you have people who have lived a life of luxury, who have always been told that people under them stay under them, they're going to want to create a world that's just like that because it's the world that they know.
And they use their intelligence to justify their assholiness.
Right. So I think we're good there.
Yeah.
Before we're going for too much longer. So moving on to our next question. Mike, this one's going to be for you. So I want you to go first. What is one thing you would change about the series or just in one specific game?
The series, just the whole 1930s kind of style thing. But I mean, I can't ask them to change that because that's literally the theme of the game. So, I mean, that's just something I disliked about it. And I honestly didn't think the story progressions, like the storytelling of revealing stuff, was amazing to me. I knew the guy was going to double cross me like 20 minutes into the first game. I was like, oh, this guy's a bad guy.
Why? How did you know that?
I just knew. It's just one of those things. The way the story was, like how it was being presented was kind of like obvious. It's kind of like when you watch so many horror movies, you kind of know how the story is going to progress. You're like, well, this is going to fucking happen. Well, this is going to fucking. So, and same thing with Infinite. I think around like the third mission with Elizabeth with you, I was like, you're her fucking dad. I was like, I fucking knew right away. I was like, they're going to try to spin that later. And at the end, it's like, yeah, that's fucking you. And plus, you're the fucking bad guy. Like, I've just figured out I at least figured out the twist, not like the expanded storyline, but at least the major twist parts were not a surprise to me. But the expanding storyline of learning the universe, that was still really good. But and plus, I think the hook stuff was just too gimmicky for Infinite. I thought it was kind of useless and pointless. The grapple hook thing.
Skyhook.
Yeah, Skyhook. I didn't think it was needed. I thought it was pointless. I mean, it looked cool when they did the trailers, like, oh, that looks badass. But when I was actually playing the game, I was like, I just kind of like shoot my way, kill everybody, and then when I need to traverse to the next place, I'll just traverse.
And then something I was reading about, this is a couple years ago when I was reading a retrospective, they were talking about how in the trailer, all the skyhook stuff was done, of course, in the trailer, but they never were able to reach that kind of complexity with the skyhook system because just of, they couldn't do it. And so that's why
jumping around,
right.
shooting, using your abilities while you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's something that they couldn't ever reach. And I mean that we see that in games all the time where we see a trailer and then everyone's like, "Oh, that's incredible," and then they never fulfill it. That's just the limitations, unfortunately.
But so those, it's minor things that I think would change. I mean, maybe the plot twists, people like them, but
So the big thing for you though is the theme. The theme is what turns you off from the game. I can understand that. How about you, Frank?
So I watched a video on YouTube that actually talked about the troubled development of Bioshock Infinite. Remember it was delayed a whole bunch of times.
Yeah.
So there was supposed to be, of course, like a morality system and a lot more, I think, character depth and everything like that. And for me, I think that's what I would have brought back. That's what I would bring back because the concepts were really cool. The complexity with the skyhook combat and everything like that. There's a lot that was left on the cutting room floor just to get the game out, and you can see hints and also like kind of the leftover afterthoughts for the morality system. I mean, literally, when you go to the carnival area, like you can choose to steal money, but there's no real consequence for it. But I mean, obviously, that was meant to play into the morality system, and that I think would have been interesting, giving the characters more depth because Infinite's really fun to play, but going back and playing it again, it's a very shallow experience compared to the first one, and that's a problem with being a AAA game developer is that you have deadlines you got to meet, you got to push this stuff out so that you can make the sales and blah 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 blah. And I just wish they had taken more time with Infinite to give us more of what we were not even really promised, I guess more of what we were expecting. You know what I mean? The DLCs I did really like. I thought those were fun. Those were cool additions to expanding the lore and the story. But I would have liked to have seen the third chapter to the Burial at Sea. Bioshock 2, honestly, I'll just have to go back and play it because I do need to give that game the time of day. It is part of the trilogy, and I know it's not a bad game. It just didn't really grab my focus. So if they could just remake that game, that'd be nice.
Remake it. That's what I'd change. How about you, James?
So Frank kind of hit the nail on the head. Exactly what I was thinking about Bioshock Infinite. It was a complete game, but I felt like there's a lot missing out of it. There's some incomplete parts. There's obviously some choices that you can make in the game that have no effect whatsoever on any of the outcomes.
Oh yeah, like really quick, when you choose Elizabeth's little choker thing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. Yeah, the bird in the cage. So
sorry, real quick. That was the exact moment I knew that he was the father. It was that scene.
Yeah. Why that scene, really quick?
I don't know, because I think she asks him which one she should choose, right, or which one to pick.
I mean, he gives like a typical guy response, like,
I don't know, man. There was just something about it, and I was like, bro, is that her dad?
But the choice with the the little pendant with the bird cage or the bird, and to me, I felt like, okay, do I want her to be like? I felt like playing it first, like I'm making a choice here. Do I want her? I saw the bird as being like free as a bird or bound in a cage, right? And I felt like, well, if I pick one or the other, what effect is it going to have? And no real consequence ever came of that. Maybe Frank can put some more light on that. You were going to say something about it.
No, yeah, it just I forgot. I'm so sorry. I haven't watched it in a while. But there was something that was supposed to lead like a scene that's supposed to lead from that, whatever choice you make. But literally, there's no difference.
Yeah, there's no difference in it. There's another scene where you're about to be ambushed, but you don't really know it. But there's kind of hints that you're going to be ambushed. He's like ringing the bell to get service, and the guy's on the phone, like, "Hey, what do you want me to do with this?" And you have a choice of pulling out your weapon and shooting the guy, or continuing to pressure the guy, right? If you choose to pull your weapon out, you shoot the guy in the face, and it freaks Elizabeth out, and she doesn't like it. If you choose to try to talk to him, he stabs you in the hand, right? And of course, later on, if you choose to shoot the guy, Elizabeth's really disgusted by it. Like, you shot that person. I think regardless of whether or not.
She's disgusted either way.
Either way, she's disgusted. But I felt like that was going to be like a morality choice, right? She's going to react to the way.
Consequence at all then?
Yeah, she's going to react to the way I handle certain situations, right? But either way, it doesn't matter. The only difference here is that either you have a bandage over your hand or you don't throughout the rest of the game. So there's no consequence. And I felt like there was, a path for that. There was framework for it, but they never completed it. And that's what I'm kind of disappointed about it. That morality system. And Frank pretty much
like a missed opportunity for it.
It's a lot of missed opportunities. And also like the tears too. Where she gives you kind of combat advantages through different elements on the map, where you can open a tear to give you extra cover, or you can open up a tear to give you health or something like that. Again, like that, everybody saw that trailer that kind of showcased that element, but I felt like it wasn't very fleshed out. And it was more of a gimmick, because you pretty much can have Elizabeth not do any of that stuff for you, and you can win most battles.
Yeah. Especially with the Vigors, because I feel like in Infinite, you can get very overpowered, kind of like the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, almost to the point where you can pretty much get through any battle without suffering too many consequences.
Well, anyway, I could say the best thing that come out of Bioshock Infinite is the source filmmaker porn.
What?
The source filmmaker porn.
That's why Ken Levine's all pissed off and
fucking Elizabeth.
That's porn. Right. Yeah.
Shit's just fucking everywhere.
He got pretty angry about that. I remember he had some sort of like massive internet rant. Where he was like really disgusted by people making porn of Elizabeth, but Rule 34, man. You're not going to stop it from happening.
Sick people like Mike who love that stuff.
What? Come on, bro.
How many times have you watched now, Mike?
I do it in moderation, okay? It's not like I'm a dick.
I was watching it before this podcast. I was getting ready.
He's watching it right now.
Dude, do I have my screen on live or what?
Oh, man.
I did like the eagle, though. The eagle was really cool.
Oh, the songbird?
The songbird,
yes,
yeah.
Songbird. That was pretty cool.
I kind of felt like he was supposed to show up more often and be like a menacing, kind of like the Big Daddies.
Yeah.
I felt like he was going to be like one of those reoccurring massive bosses that that really puts your abilities to the test, and it's more of like a story element than anything else.
Yeah. He just kind of shows up and like does like those not really quick events, but you have to avoid him and kind of just
not even that.
Not engage him now. Like I gotta walk the hallway.
He's more of an element of the story rather than an element of the gameplay.
Yeah. Right. Well, I was going to say, and you guys already brought it up, I was going to make another connection. So the morality system that was lacking in Bioshock Infinite, they did have that in Bioshock to a small degree. It felt pretty superficial with Little Sisters, where you had the choice to either save him or kill him. And if you killed him, you gained more at him. And if you saved him, you got less at him. But then it also changed the ending to the story a little bit based on whether you saved him or not. And so there was some of that in the original game. And so when I played Bioshock Infinite, the very first choice, at least that I remember that comes to mind, is when you're at the it's like the carnival and there's a show and there's the black guy and the white woman and they're having a relationship, so they put them up on stage and you have the choice.
I thought it was a white guy and a black girl.
It was.
Okay. And, someone's pelting him with rocks and you have the choice to do the same or not. And then, but ultimately, even though it has the consequence of bringing attention to yourself, ultimately it doesn't change anything. It's just a way to introduce you into the way the world is like that Comstock has created. And like you said, with the rest of the choices in Infinite, they ultimately have no impact on the overall game. So that is the one thing I would change. I'd like to see more of that in Infinite, because it really does seem story-wise and world-building-wise that it would lend itself a lot better. Because like you said, when you play through it again, you notice there are gaps. It's like, oh, there should have been something here, there should have been something there, and there wasn't. So hopefully if they ever get to redo it, if Ken Levine gets a chance to go back and redo Infinite, he'll do that.
In the first Bioshock, when you have the choice to either save or harvest the little sisters, though, one thing I'll say is that I never had an issue getting Adam because, what's her name? Is it Tenenbaum?
Tenenbaum, yeah.
Yep. Like, she's like, well, if you save him, I'll give you Adam anyway. And so you just get a slightly lesser amount, but you still get way more than you need by the end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, do you want to get powerful now, or are you patient enough to, get more powerful stuff later?
Yeah, that's why it's superficial, because ultimately you're making a decision that in the long run doesn't really impact you. We talked about this with Mass Effect in our last podcast, where the decisions that you make in Mass Effect, impact things that happen throughout all three games. But in this game, the impact is almost non-existent.
I feel like the framework is there for it. And I feel that if they did include it, it would change things quite a bit, but also, breathe a little more life into the story and your character. I feel like it's just more of a missed opportunity. And of course, there's limitations. I understand the limitations that they had at the time.
But so many games do that too, though, where they introduce saying like, oh, you make choices and decisions, and then you're like, oh, well, that doesn't really do shit. And lots of games do that.
But you have to think about too is, from a technical perspective, that's a lot of work.
It is. I would.
Right. It is a lot, because you have to now have to think into the future, what's going to happen, how many different directions can you go in, right? And what different combinations of choices can you make, right?
They should just get R.L. Stein as a writer then, so he could do those Choose Your Path adventure books.
That's right. Choose your own story.
Choose your own goosebumps.
Well, here's my counterpoint to that, though, is that with Infinite, you get one ending. But even in Bioshock, which is the first one in the series, you have two endings.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand why they couldn't have done at least the same thing, at least two endings for Infinite.
And 2 is good enough, because that's automatically a replay value. I got to go back and try it and do it and get the second ending,
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we're all kind of in agreement on the kind of things that they needed to be fixed. So we'll see where it goes from there. So finally, to close out our podcast, I have our final question for us. What is your favorite Bioshock game and why? And I guess I'll go first on this one. Obviously I only have 2 to choose from because I haven't played number 2. But ultimately, I probably have to go with Bioshock Infinite. I really like the original Bioshock. It's close, but I think ultimately what makes the difference for me is that story element of Booker being Elizabeth's father and also being Comstock. And even though it missed some steps on the way it told the story, and it didn't exactly do a great job of, hiding that concept that he was her father and he was also Comstock. Ultimately, I can always, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a father of girls. It's like with Last of Us, where the beginning of the game, the stuff happens and he and his daughter are trying to escape and she ends up dying in his arms. And like that got to me because, as a father losing a child, that would be, that would be devastating. And it's kind of the thing here where, this guy is doing a job because he has to do a job and, he's lost his family and he has an opportunity here to redeem himself. And I always love these redemption stories, I guess. I think that's part of the reason why I love Westerns so much, because a lot of times they're redemption stories. And to me, that's what Bioshock Infinite is. It's a type of redemption story. And I like the character of Booker DeWitt. I think he's a pretty well fleshed out character. And I like the interactions between him and Elizabeth, especially because she's so naive and it gives him an opportunity to teach her things. Now, did they completely fulfill that the best way they could have? Maybe not. They probably missed some story beats here or there. But ultimately, it's the story that sold me on Infinite, not so much the gameplay. I think the gameplay between the two, probably the original Bioshock is better, I feel. But the story elements between those two characters is what really drove me to play, because it's the only Bioshock I've gone through and played again. I tried going through and playing the original Bioshock, and it's not that I disliked it, just I didn't feel like I was gaining anything by going through it again. But with Infinite, going through it again, there were things that I had missed between their conversations that I hadn't picked up before that I got the second time around.
Nice. Yeah, makes sense. You're a dad. Booker's a dad. Well, I mean, and also the voice acting was, I think, really, and it was really excellent in Bioshock Infinite, which is why I think their relationship and them bouncing off each other in conversations really worked well.
So how about you, Frank? Your favorite?
I'm gonna cheat because I always do. But my favorite is the first one, but my favorite to play is Infinite. Because the first one, I think that story is just so well fleshed out. I love Rapture. Rapture is definitely like the ultimate setting for Bioshock, especially compared to Columbia. And the only reason I say Bioshock Infinite's more fun to play is because, kind of like with 2, they fixed the gameplay elements for 1 that I had issues with, like having to switch between the plasmids and your weapons, and honestly, once you get the electric gel and you get the telekinesis, it's over. Like, that game is so easy to just walk through at that point. Like, once I had those 2, I could beat any Big Daddy like within a matter of seconds. I could, I beat Fontaine at the very end without struggling too much. Like, I remember reading about how a lot of people had issues with the final boss because he kept going and regenerating his health. And I'm like, dude, just electric gel him to death. I mean, it took me maybe a couple minutes. So that's it. I mean, I have gone back to Bioshock, but I haven't finished it again because it's not as fun to go back to play. But Infinite is, and I've gone back to Infinite twice. I got it. I played through it the first time I got it, and then I played through it when I got it on PC. And yeah, so Infinite's more fun to play, in my opinion.
One of the criticisms that I forgot to bring up earlier, Bioshock 1, I felt that when you would die in Bioshock 1, there wasn't a consequence because you had the regeneration tubes or whatever they were called. And
the Vita Chambers.
The Vita Chambers. And I remember the first time I realized that this game was going to be, it wasn't going to be easy, but it wasn't going to be challenging. There was a point where I ran into a Big Daddy in this perpendicular hallway, right? And he was going from one side to the other, and because of there wasn't enough space for me to move around and avoid him, I kept dying. So the first time I died, I got rejuvenated in a Vita Chamber, and he already had depleted health. It's not like his health got restored. So all I had to do was go up to him and keep whacking him, and then die, and then go back and do it all over again. So it wasn't challenging. It was just...
Well, you did lose money. Right? James, it reminded me, you lost money, and did you lose Eve or no? Or Adam?
No, you didn't lose any Eve or Adam. You lost money.
Right?
Yeah, you lost money.
Wait,
but you can turn the Vita Chambers off. The menu.
Well, I didn't know that was an option, but I mean, the thing is that it's on by default, and
Yes.
it just to be set up that way, where every time you die, you get revived immediately to where you left off, and it's like there's no consequences to your death. I know you lose money, but I never had an issue finding money to buy the things that I needed to do. And like
The challenge wasn't there.
Yeah, I never felt the challenge there. Where with Infinite, you would die and then you would pick up from a checkpoint with a more traditional style, and so I felt there was more challenge there, especially when you up the difficulty, because those characters got a lot more. That AI got a lot more difficult and cheap in some cases with the difficulty spike in Infinite. I'm sorry. Anyway, I just wanted to add that in there. But James, tell us your favorite Bioshock game.
Like I'm torn between the first one and Infinite. But I'm gonna have to go with the first one. It's playing it nowadays is a little dated. The control schemes are just a little dated, not very intuitive. But going back to that original story, just the overall world building of it, I feel hasn't been topped in a lot of games in its genre. And so that's like the one I fell in love with the first time around, so I'm gonna have to go with the first one.
Well, especially the world building within a single game. A lot of times games take multiple games to do that kind of depth to the world.
Yeah, and Mike mentioned that he doesn't like the having to gather pieces of the story through through the little tapes that you have to listen to, but that just kind of builds on the exploration. You have to explore, and it gives you the opportunity to do a lot of exploring in that game. That's what a lot of people, I don't think people fully understand about Bioshock 1. There is a lot of exploration and a lot of if you like looting, there's a lot of loot to get. A lot of little nooks and crannies and things to explore, and you're rewarded with a tape that explains more of the story. And that's the kind of thing I appreciate in a game like that, where I can take my time and the world is built around me through the progression of the game.
Right.
And I think Bioshock 1 did that the best.
Yeah. It's good reasons, man. And Mike, I saved the best for last because I know your choice is the most disputed one.
Okay, so mine is Bioshock 2. That's my favorite one, just because I enjoyed it the most out of all three. I understand all of them are really great games, I think. So, but I can explain why. The first one, like James said, there's more exploration. It seemed more. It's not an open world, but it kind of has areas to explore. I wasn't a big fan of the compass system. The game is good. The shooting's good. I guess my biggest thing is, of course, of course, I don't like the themes, but that's all of Bioshock. But the compass system was kind of weird for me. I didn't really like where it tells you where to go, but it doesn't take you to the point of where you need to turn and then change. It kind of is just pointing at the direction where you need to be or get to at the whole time. So I don't know the route to get there. It's just pointing where I need to be. And I always thought that was frustrating in the first one. I still like the first one. I'm just saying that was my problem with that one. I already said what I had the problem with Infinite was kind of the story. It's also steampunk. I like using Steam on my computer for games. I like listening to punk, but I fucking hate steampunk too. Like, I don't like steampunk. Like, steampunk shit is stupid.
Why don't you like steampunk?
I don't know. It's weird. It's like, I don't like. It's another one of those things. Bioshock did both of the early 1930s 40s style, which I don't like. Then they changed it to like we're gonna do Infinite. I was like, fuck, it's steampunk. I don't like steampunk either. Like I don't like that style of stuff.
So unlike Reese's Pieces, that peanut butter and chocolate go good together, you feel that steam and punk don't go well together.
Yeah. But Infinite is a good game though. But what I really like about 2, it's because I'm fucking simple-minded, bro. Like the story is just not super in depth. It's kind of like you're going through a stage of Halo. It's just you get to point A to point B, and that's how you progress through it. That's how I feel. I'm gonna keep going in this direction and shoot shit until I fucking win. You know, that's basically why I enjoyed 2 a lot. And I didn't have to go too in depth to all the story. Didn't have to really read all the logs to kind of get the basics of what's going on in that one. And actually, I think the shooting control aspect, I don't know if anybody else would agree with me. I think Infinite seemed weird, the shooting aspect. Like, it seemed like no matter what I did, even if I lowered the settings, the aiming seemed oversensitive and kind of not fluent.
Fluid.
But, yeah, fluid. But that's just me how I felt about it. I think part 2 was the most tight controls for like at least aiming and shooting aspect, which is still a cool game. It just felt weird, and yeah, that's basically the preference of why, or that's basically reasons why.
Thanks, Mike. Before we close out,
I can rant more if you want.
No, that's enough. But before we close out, Frank, what the fuck are you doing with your mouth?
I was shooting. I was playing Bioshock Infinite.
Dude, but you're there with your mouth half open and your tongue occasionally flicking out. Like, what is that?
Yeah. Well, I was also a little confused by what Mike was saying. Like, I want to ask you, and I'm not being a dick.
Yeah.
Like,
go for it.
Okay, what is it about steampunk you don't like, though?
I don't know, man. It just seems like a weird universe.
But like what?
I don't know. It just visually doesn't. It's not visually appealing to me.
Okay.
It's the aesthetics.
Like, yes, it's just like I don't know.
You must have hated Wild Wild West then.
Yes,
because it had all kinds of things you hated. It had steampunk, it had westerns, and it had Will Smith.
I mean, if I could go to a convention with like steampunk people or furries, I think I'm gonna go hang out with the furries for a bit.
Wow.
What if they make you participate?
I'm just kidding. Imagine they fucking combine together steampunk furries.
Oh Jesus!
It's like, bro.
I'm pretty sure there's steampunk furries out there.
Let's research it. We'll talk about our next podcast.
Rule 34, bro.
Oh man. All right. Well. Oh, go ahead, Frank.
So I was gonna ask this. With Bioshock, would you want them to make another game? I forgot. I wanted to bring that up. Would you guys want them to make another game?
Yes.
So that's a good question because you can answer it 2 different ways, because it's like, do you want them to make a sequel to one of the existing games, or would you want them to make a whole new Bioshock with a completely different world? I don't know.
They did Underwater. They did Underwater. They did the sky. Now they're going to do outer space.
I was thinking inside a volcano, but whatever.
I mean, they kind of did outer space with System Shock too. So.
Oh, there you go. They could just bring back the System Shock and do it that way and say.
I'm gonna say no. Because I'm happy with what we have.
Isn't there like thousands and thousands of lighthouses? I want to see them all.
Yeah, but now we're getting into sequel territory that you either try to create an entire new world, which may fall short, or you go back to Rapture, or you go back to
Columbia.
See, that's what's cool. With their storyline, you can always create something new if you want. the way it's set up, I guess.
Well, I mean, they've already messed with the idea of a multiverse. I mean, well, not even messed with. The
only problem is like the
That is the
philosophy
main-
of what you guys are talking about has already been accomplished, or it's already been taught or used in the game.
Well, I mean, I think personally, the philosophy can always be revisited because it can always be interpreted in different ways. There's other philosophies they can look at. I mean, think
It can
about
be
it from
explored
this.
in different ways.
You can think about it this way, where there's 5 Persona games, but aside from 1 and 2, which were directly connected, 3, 4, and 5 are just whole new worlds, whole new interpretations of those personas and the way that universe works. And you can definitely do the same thing with Bioshock, where you maintain the name, but you introduce a whole new world. And I mean, they didn't really need the multiverse part to make an excuse for that.
Persona, are they linked though?
Not directly. I mean, every world is its
one
own
in
world.
Infinite. Wait, are you talking about the multiverse?
No, he was asking about Persona.
Yeah,
Oh,
Persona, are they linked? Because Bioshocks, they're linked because of the towers, right? Like they're talking about the dimensions, right?
Right. They're linked in that sense. And
The multiverse.
In the case of Elizabeth, she has the power to go to those different universes. But again, that doesn't need to be something that needs to be followed up on. I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I mean, from what I've read, there is a large group of fans that were dissatisfied with the multiverse concept and didn't like that there were different universes to attend to. And even though they liked the idea of the way Burial at Sea was handed, still the idea of being able to traverse different universes, some people didn't buy into. But I think part of it too is it was kind of handled in a way which was very sci-fi generic, as opposed to applying it in a way that was different or new. And but again,
I did like that they did it that way though, because it was kind of an explanation of why Infinite's universe exists, sort of in a way. Because when I going into it, I was okay. Well, this is the exact same thing as fucking Rapture, but it's in the sky. And then adding that multiverse kind of gives a good explanation to why this always happens. And she explains it's always a lighthouse, it's always something like this in the ocean, but it's always the same kind of situation, sort of in a way,
Yeah, but again,
See, it's all.
Go ahead, James.
Oh, it's also grounded in real science and real theories about our universe. There are actual scientific theories about a multiverse where, choices that you make, there may be another, plane of existence where you made another choice, and you have a different future and a different path.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's one of the coolest things I thought about the whole series was as learning that at the end of Infinite. I think it was kind of like a wrap up of the whole series, explaining it all, sort of in a way, or explaining why that universe exists.
Yeah, but
I mean, it also explains like the also the elements of the world building, right?
Yeah.
How can you have a city in the sky? Well, it kind of explains that through like this multiverse theory with quantum physics, and so it's all part of the world building. I think.
But again, I don't think you need that aspect of the story in order to continue the Bioshock series. Again, like with Persona or other games of its type, where you have a common theme across the game. So Bioshock, like we talked about it earlier, has to do with a person in using their philosophy to try to recreate a world that in their mind used to exist, that in reality doesn't exist, and it causes more harm than it does good. And I think if you build another Bioshock game around that concept, then you're better off. And then you maintain some of the other themes with the mechanics about the first person shooter and having things like plasmids or abilities, even though they may come under different names. And again, I understand why they did the multiverse theory, but I don't think, again, it needs to be something that has to constantly be revisited, especially if fans are going to react negatively to it. Now, I personally didn't have an issue with it. I just felt it was just introduced in a very generic way that, that other sci-fi stuff does. It wasn't like anything that was used any different way. From a story point element, like I said, I like it because it's a redemption story, though part of it I felt redemption stories are better when the character comes to the conclusion on their own about what they need to be redeemed by, rather than, oh, well, I just saw an evil version of myself and now I think I need to make better decisions in my life. And so that, I think that was part of the issue with that, but they wanted to go that way with the multiverse, and that was fine. I still think it worked for what it needed to do. But ultimately, yeah, I think they can make more Bioshock games. And if they were to make another one, would I be interested in playing it? Yes.
So basically, you're saying it's just you're okay with it being just a reimagining if it was just another Bioshock.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess we could say it's a reimagining. I just again think you can create another game without having to worry about what happened in the previous games.
Or not, they don't have to explain the multiverse, just make a story.
Yeah, it doesn't even have to connect to the original games directly. It can be, again, just call back to them thematically.
Cool. No, that would be cool too. I mean, I'm okay with either or, so.
I would agree, but in the state of video games nowadays, I don't think it would be done right.
It's the sequels and making too many games.
Well, also, you also have very large AAA studios. Their goal ultimately is to make as much money as they can. So they're going to throw in a lot of like nostalgic stuff. They're going to throw in stuff that really doesn't need to be there in order to sell the game.
Hey guys, you remember Bioshock 1? We're going to put this in it. It's like,
that kind of stuff
pretty much
happens.
what they did with Barrel at Sea.
Yeah, and they, the state of video games nowadays, I don't think it lends itself to a good sequel that could come about.
that's the thing. Do you think Bioshock as a whole, the 3 games, is a good trilogy?
No.
You think they're too different from each other?
Yeah, I think the issue that I really have is just they all feel very separate, and that's not a good trilogy. I mean, they all have the concepts are all very similar. The stories have similar themes, and the art direction, they've changed it up. But I wouldn't say it's a good trilogy, especially because of 2, honestly. And then the jump from Bioshock to Infinite, especially with the Infinite that we got, I feel like we got shortchanged. So I love the series. I mean, I love one in Infinite. I will go back and play 2, but I wouldn't say that it's a solid trilogy.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even call it a trilogy because, I mean, they're not a continuation of the story. They're a trilogy in the sense of that they share themes, but really 1 and 2 are the duology, and then Infinite is its own thing. And then you just have in general this Bioshock series.
Okay, so I actually don't remember. Is 2 in the same universe as 1, or is it a different Rapture?
No, it's the same one.
It's the same Rapture.
It's just
same Rapture? Okay.
it's after the first game.
Yeah.
Because it's been a while since I played it.
All right.
The only thing I wanted to talk about is just this one last thing with Infinite is some of like the historical elements I also put into, because I, obviously like a lot of history, so they included a lot of history in in the world of Columbia. Booker DeWitt was part of the 7th Cavalry, which
Carried
out Wounded Knee. And in fact, if you look at his, if you go, like, there's parts where you're in his office. If you look up on his wall, you actually see, I guess, his war medals, his rank. He's with the 7th Cavalry. He actually has a Medal of Honor, which was given out during the Battle of Wounded Knee. Some people view that now in history as not a very good thing that the military did. Slaughtered a lot of innocent women and children, and it carries,
everybody.
Yeah, it carries over into the character himself, because he actually he regrets that whole incident. It's affected him pretty badly too.
There's minor details that flesh out the character that you can know. Yeah. Pretty cool.
Not only that, but he was also in the Boxer Revolution. Was it the Boxer Revolution?
Boxer Rebellion.
Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion, American troops were actually sent into China to go deal with that. So, I mean, like I said, there's a lot of historical stuff behind it.
Yeah,
and I could really appreciate that as fleshing out the character.
You know what? I can agree with you to an extent, but kind of like Bobby said, I think it was done in a very superficial way. It's like, here's his backstory, and yeah, they'll sprinkle some stuff in, but I think it's more kind of propped up as opposed to really fleshed out.
Well, I mean, it gives the character. It sets him in a reality. It sets him in the world. Having those little details, and like I said, if you're not familiar with history, you're not going to know a lot of this stuff, and you're not going to really recognize that detail in the background. He was a soldier. He was, and he was also part of the Pinkertons, which was also a real life organization, actually a company that did some horrible things. Everything that Booker DeWitt was a part of in his younger years was all horrible, horrible stuff.
Yeah, but I don't think that it was fleshed out as well as it could have been. Like, it was given to him, but it's so much of an afterthought because in the gameplay and the story that they're telling you, after you learn about it, it's really not the focus. It's just, I feel bad about what I did. I was part of the Pinkertons. I was part of the battle, or the Wounded Knee Massacre. But, it doesn't really have a huge impact on the story that I think the way it could have been.
Well, I think
I don't remember if he speaks. I don't remember his voice.
It's Troy
Baker.
He does speak? Like while you're playing? I don't remember this.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, he's the most vocal. Well, he's the only vocal protagonist.
Okay. I really don't remember, dude. It's been a while.
So, I mean, obviously they're dealing with a world that's not our own. It's supposed to be a multiverse, so it's an alternate reality that we have, obviously flying cities and shit. But, like Wounded Knee happened in 1890, and the game takes place in 1912. So, I mean, this stuff happened 22 years ago, time frame wise. And Elizabeth is supposed to be how old at this point in the game?
18.
Now, is this
18?
Am I remembering this correctly? Where did his wife leave him and take her, or did his wife die
died.
and he gave up his daughter to those
scientists? His wife died, I think, in childbirth, right?
He gave up his daughter to his future self, didn't he?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Right, like he gave up his daughter to somebody. Okay, and so that time has passed in real life, because it feels to me like, for some reason, it's stuck in my head like he gave up his daughter like a few years ago, and now he runs into this older version of her on the job.
Well,
but
that's where the whole multiverse comes into play, because you experience that time dilation later on in the game, where Elizabeth's been captured, and come to find out, she just got captured and was taken away, but then this event happens, and now it's been 6 months, and you're not realizing that much time has passed. You're still looking for her, but 6 months has already passed, and she's already, been tortured and brainwashed by Comstock. But then, it brings you back, and again, that's part of that whole multiverse, multiple dimension, time dilation kind of thing that's going on.
Well,
so we just don't know the Booker that we see. He just gave up his daughter. But Elizabeth is his daughter, now older and 18 years old.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is the 1912 in reference to where Columbia is, or is 1912 the year that Booker is from?
Both.
Both.
He's going up to Columbia in 1912.
Okay, so he didn't have a family until 22 years after the fact. After the fact that he dealt with Wounded Knee, and several, probably a decade after he dealt with being a member of the Pinkertons and the.
You're probably dealing with him. Are you talking about as you're playing him?
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where at what point he is in his life. I mean, if we're talking about a 22-year gap, you figure he was maybe 18 when the Wounded Knee incident occurred in 1890. So at this point, he would be 40 years old.
Yeah, he's
You
in
know.
his 40s, maybe closer to 50, when you're actually playing as him.
So I'm just trying to understand, if it's been that long since he's had those experiences, how much, and he was able to have a family and then have regrets about things that have happened with his family, how much of him is actually lost. It's just those kinds of things that seem a little bit more inconsistent, and that's where we come back to the issue with the story not being as well fleshed out as it could have been.
But I always thought once you transverse to like Rapture or to the Columbia. Once you transverse to that, I thought they were going to. That's when they go to a different part of the multiverse. Like I thought he was transporting to a different one. Because how could there be two Bookers if he's the villain, unless he went to a different dimension?
Well, because those twins brought him. Those twins are the ones that are bringing him in and out of those multiple universes too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There can't be two Bookers unless one of them's transversing to a different universe.
No, we're not arguing that. We're just talking about how does that affect time then? Because I don't understand then what time period Booker is coming from.
But what was the year when he went into the transporter?
It said that the game takes place in the year 1912.
12. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry, man. I didn't mean to get mixed up on that. I just thought
it's a little convoluted because we're dealing with multiverses, we're dealing with time dilation, moving in between time periods because Elizabeth can open up tears in different times too. You saw that she opened up a tear in Paris in the 1980s because there was a marquee that said, what was it, Return of the Jedi or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys noticed that, but
they have music from the 70s play at one point and stuff like that. I mean, it's literature. Well, actually, I think Tainted Love is played at one point.
I think the Beatles is played as a barbershop quartet. But yeah, there's this whole traversing both time and space that seems to be all mixed up all in this one universe that's up in Columbia.
Now I gotta go back.
That's probably why everything's all kind of screwy and things aren't what they seem to be in that world.
I really need to play all of this again. Talking about it's making me like pique my interest again about story wise and stuff like that. Plus, Erica's been wanting to play it for a while.
Yeah, there's a lot of little details in that in Infinite that I can appreciate.
Plus, thank you, Mike Prime. Mike Prime gave me a copy of his HT collection.
Awesome.
I just haven't used it yet. Sorry.
So I know that's kind of like a weak way of explaining some of the convoluted stuff, but I know I can appreciate what they're trying to do.
Ultimately, we're just going to go around in circles about what we're trying to figure out.
I think they did it pretty well to explain Bioshock Infinite.
I'm going to have to disagree with that one. I don't think they did as good a job as they could have done to explain it. Because I mean, yes, they explained that those things exist, but the rules don't exist. There's no set guidelines on when she makes tears, what goes where, and I know part of it is because she's young and she's still learning how to control her powers, but then to then help it explain what's going on with the story. Still, I think there are things that are lacking. And again, it comes back to the possibility that maybe they didn't have enough time to flesh those things out. Or maybe they left it purposely vague because they were going to extend, add more to it. Like Frank said, that chapter is missing that we're probably never going to get. Or maybe there's a plan for Bioshock 4 that was going to expand on it. I mean, we don't know. Maybe one day we'll find out.
Or they just look.
Well, in the inconsistencies in Infinite, I mean, it breaks a lot of its own rules a lot. So I think, whatever the morality system maybe was going to factor in, but even if it wasn't, what we did get was very inconsistent. Because, one thing that really sticks out to me is when you see the people who you killed and then they're alive again in the dimension you're currently in, but they're all, twitchy and they're bleeding out of their nose. But then, of course, Booker, who was killed in one of the multiverses, his nose is bleeding, but he's completely fine. And that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. There's a lot of inconsistencies with Infinite's story. Like the historical references, yeah, they are cool, but to me, they don't really add to it as much as they expected it to. Like it's fun to play.
I think it adds to the tragedy of the character. That's all what I think.
After this discussion, can I change my favorite game to Bioshock now?
Bioshock 2. That's the only one you can change.
But no, I mean, just if you focus on the characters, like Booker and Elizabeth's relationship and his redemption story, it's still, without all, the quantum physics and all the extra stuff that they try to do with it, that they stumbled all over, then it's still a pretty good story. The characters are likable, very likable, as a matter of fact. I like Booker's character a lot.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of personality. And Elizabeth, she is great. So I wouldn't.
She's probably one of the best side
NPCs.
characters for NPCs for shooter.
I'd say in general.
In general.
Yeah, because you don't have like her and Ellie, because it's like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about them. They can handle themselves.
Yeah. But no, she's a really good character though. I mean, think that's a really good drawing point for Infinite also. What's actually really cool though is I could at least say this though, each Bioshock has its own charm or something it brings to the series.
Yeah.
Unless you say 2 sucks balls, then whatever.
No, I just haven't gotten into it for what I did play, but
I think they all bring something to the table for it.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And we could say that 2 is the weaker of the bunch, but like I said, it's just the story is just weaker. I mean, it's not a bad game by any means. I suggest people go and play it. But just out of the 3 of them, that one's probably the weakest. And I'm not gonna say it's a bad game. I'm not gonna say that you suck for liking it. I understand why you like it perfectly. It's just weaker.
All right, I think we're all good here. So I'd like to thank Mike B, Frank, and James for coming out to tonight's podcast and recording this much more in-depth discussion of Bioshock than I had originally anticipated. I will admit I had difficulty writing the questions up for this episode, just partly because there's only 3 games of the series, of which only 2 I played, but also because I didn't know where we would go with the discussion for this one. And maybe that was for the best, because it kind of opened up a lot of things for us to discuss, especially here at the end. So thank you for joining us in tonight's podcast. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. And
thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks for having me, man. It was fun.
And next time we meet, I don't know what podcast we're doing next. We had talked about doing an episode on Street Fighter versus Mortal Kombat and talking about the differences between the 2 games, what makes them good and bad. But I had also mentioned to Frank that I think now would be a good time to do a episode on Final Fantasy VII, since people have had enough time to play the remake. I know, James, you've been playing it. Did you ever finish it?
I have not finished it yet, but I'm still getting through it.
Okay, and but we may do that next, so we'll see. We'll figure that out. But anyway, thank you everyone for listening tonight, and we will see you guys next time.
Laters.
Bye.
Well, there you have it. the good, the bad, and the ugly of Bioshock, as we see it. In our previous podcast, we generally agree on what makes a particular game or series great in our eyes. What I loved about today's conversation, though, was the opportunity for a true debate, as not all members of the group felt the same about the series. As a series, yes, we all love it, but the distinct differences in what we love really allowed for different perspectives to be shared. And the best thing? The conversation was civil, albeit lowbrow, but civil nonetheless, and that's how it should be. This episode's opening and closing music come directly from the Bioshock series. The opening music titled Welcome to Rapture was composed by Gary Schyman and released in Bioshock. The closing music titled Elizabeth was also composed by Gary Schyman and released in Bioshock Infinite. Check the description for links to the audio tracks. Thank you for tuning in to today's show. I will leave you with one last quote from Ayn Rand. I can't actually find any attribution to her, but I'm confident it's something she would say, especially about the Bioshock series. Come on, man, what the fuck? Ayn Rand. See you guys in 2 weeks when we discuss Final Fantasy VII.